It's Sunday. It's time for another thrilling Bible study.
Thrilling.
Yeah. Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, with Luke, not the Luke of the Gospel of Luke.
Is there a Luke?
Yes, there is. There is. Which we talked about, I believe, in the very first episode. But today, even before we get into the chapter, last week there were a couple dangling questions that you had that I took a little bit of time, although I don't think I have a remarkable amount that I want to say about them, because really both of these answers require, I guess, getting into the book of Revelation, which is fascinating, and maybe one day I'd like to do a line by line study of that as well, but that is probably going to be at least in 2026. It's not going to it's I don't see that happening in 2025 after doing this for 6 months.
Okay.
So the first question that you had was, what happens after the lake of fire? Okay. And I sort of hemmed and hawed about it, and we talked about a view that was contrasted with the idea of eternal torment known as annihilationism, right? And there are really three different camps that break down on this particular question. There's the traditionalist view that there is sort of eternal torment in the lake of fire. There's this annihilationist view that it's incompatible with a just and fair God, and so so these souls will ultimately cease in some way. And then a variety or a close cousin of that is a view called conditionalism, or the conditionalist camp. And I think the idea here is that kind of everyone's soul is slated for annihilation, but those that are saved kind of get an upgrade and get to experience eternity. Okay. There are actually some pretty famous early Christians and throughout the ages that supported the view of annihilationism. Notably, Justin Martyr, which is someone that's often cited in theological studies, Irenaeus of Lyons, who did his famous work against heresies that I talked about periodically during the study of Job, who's against Gnosticism and all the schismatics. Ironically, he probably would have opposed Protestants as well, so he would have called us heretics, or at least myself a heretic. So that was kind of a mixed bag studying that, and others, but I think those are the main ones. So there is a storied tradition of annihilationism. It is a minority view, and I think the traditionalists, and you can read certain passages in favor of annihilationism, but I think in general what the traditionalist view has going for it is, like, the Bible kind of ends, and it ends talking about eternity, both upwards and downwards. And we don't really know. There are some passages that can be read either way, but I think we would be adding to the book of Revelation, in my opinion, to adopt annihilationism or conditionalism, or the conditionalist camp. So that's the long and the short of it. Is that satisfactory?
I think so for today. Okay. So, like, it's not necessarily conclusive within the actual text. It's things people are laying on top of the text.
Right. I think in my personal opinion, the lion's share of evidence is for the traditionalist view on this particular issue. But there are some passages that can be read the other way. Okay. So the other question you had was you asked me to explain the New Jerusalem, which
just explain it.
Which primarily occurs in Revelation 21 and 22.
And that was coming out of
these charts, right?
Chart with New Jerusalem up here.
Right. So this is kind of the idea that after the earth has been purified by fire, that heaven and earth are going to come back together again, and there's actually going to be a holy city that descends onto earth. The Bible talks about it as being this, like, gigantic gold cube, although there's some dispute about that. I mean, obviously you can see here from this Larkin presentation that it's more pyramidal in its dimensions. And it's got 4 different sides, whether or not it's a pyramid or a cube. And it's got 3 different gates and angels that are guarding these gates for each tribe of Israel. And there's a river of life that flows through it. And supposedly it's remarkably high. I have to go into the specs, but apparently it's like 1,000 miles high, which, you think about that. If like an airplane is flying at like 5 miles high, it's like stacked, right? That's like, and so it's going to contain all the souls of the redeemed in Christ. And ultimately they're going to live within this holy city after the earth has been purified and heaven and earth are reunited. Reunited again. There's a lot to say about this. I mean, the different stones that it's constructed of and all the jewels. And one of the more fascinating things to me about it is that it talks about, because Christ will be there, there will no longer, when I first read this like years ago, I was like, this was a total mind explosion, is that we won't need the sun and the moon anymore. Like the light of the world will actually radiate out of this city. Like, so the sun and the moon, I don't know if they're not going to exist anymore or fall. I have to study up on it, but like the whole world will be illuminated by this holy city because Christ is in there, like for the rest of the time. And something that I learned just really to the run up to us getting on here is that there's going to be this tree of life that has certain fruits in it. And it talks about there being seasons for it. Something that has come up throughout all our studies is this: what is eternity? Like, what does it mean to be immortal? What does it mean to dwell in eternity? So because there's going to be like, because there's still going to be created beings of some sort, right? Have some conversation about what sort of bodies they're going to have. There's still going to be a type of change in duration that goes on there. So typically you think about eternity as something that's outside of time, but there's still going to be some kind of time because there will still be beings there experiencing change.
Right.
Which is a fascinating concept to think about.
Yeah, that is time and yes.
So there's a lot more that could be said about New Jerusalem. I mean, one of the big things, it's so large, right? I think you have to think about like when you have this massive cube or this massive pyramid descend on Earth, like, there's like, how does this fit on a globe? Like, how do we make that happen? Right? Like that's a big question, when it's so massive, but there's a lot of other things too.
Globe, huh?
I'm not getting into that right now. All right. So we can hang out here a little bit longer, or we can go into today's study, which is chapter 21.
I feel satisfied, but we could still dive deeper into these topics.
Yeah. All right. So you ready to do this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay. And he looked up and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. So this treasury in the court of the women had 13 trumpet-shaped containers, and each one had a different cause that you could contribute to. And sometimes there might have been a priest there. And so this kind of sets up the scene. And he saw also a certain poor widow casting in thither 2 mites. Okay, so 2 mites is like one of the cheapest denominations of currency that you could use at this time. This is, I guess, mites are equivalent to leptons or lepta. They're thin copper coins. These are Jewish copper coins. And really, they're the only coins, the Jewish coins that are mentioned in the Bible, and they're worth almost nothing. Okay. And he said, of a truth, I say unto you that this poor widow hath cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast in unto the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had. So everyone else who was giving at the treasury was doing so from an abundance of wealth. But this poor widow, like, she was so destitute. Those 2 mites meant so much to her, right? That truly she was demonstrating faith by surrendering so much, right? Even though these coins mean nothing to the majority of individuals that would have been there, right? To her, they meant everything. Okay, so, and there's a lesson, right? There's a lesson about how we can think about our dedication to God, right? Like, what do you think that lesson might be?
I mean, what pops out for me in this moment also is like not to be in judgment of other people about what they are doing or not doing, because, it's not for us to know what that means to them or their circumstance.
Right.
But I think that might be a sliver of the lesson.
I think so
as we see
too.
it.
Right. But I think it also says something about how we really know how dedicated we are to God,
Sure.
right? Like, it's very facile and easy for so many individuals to throw two mites in, right? But like,
Right.
I think there's a lesson there about what we really need to sacrifice and what we really need to feel in order to truly experience the commitment. And I'm not saying it's limited to tithing or offerings and things like that, but we really have to give from a place of meaning, right? It has to not be like this meaningless donation, whether it's of our time, of our goods, of our generosity or charity, whatever it is. Okay. So now, chapter 21 is very eschatological, and so here in chapter 5, in verse 5, we're going to get that eschatological flavor. And eschatology, right? This is the study of the end times, whatever that may mean. We've looked at these broad timelines through the Larkin drawings, right? Like, it's like typically when people think about the end times, we think about the rapture and the second coming and the tribulation and the Antichrist. I don't hear this expression, the end times, applied so much to the end of the millennial reign or Satan's short season. I'm tongue-tied today. Or the purification of the timeline that ultimately results in the New Jerusalem. When people say, it's interesting to me, when people talk about eschatology, they typically have this very narrow focus on God's timeline. It seems to me like the end times are not the end times. It's more of like the middle times. Like, when I think about the end times, I'm thinking about Satan's short season and the descent of New Jerusalem. That's where like my thinking is now, but everybody is convinced that the second coming hasn't happened yet. And I'm going to get into, I think we have evidence that it has happened, which is a theme that has come up throughout these studies. Okay. And as some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts. All right. So something that I learned preparing for this today, we've talked about, do you remember the lesson that we did on the destruction of the two temples?
Yes.
Okay. And if I were to ask you whose temple was the first temple, you would say
Solomon.
Exactly. But if I were to say whose was the second temple, right? I didn't know. I was like, first temple's Solomon's temple. And I was like, oh, and then there's the second temple. I didn't know someone possessed it or it was named. It's Herod's temple.
Oh.
So, and that's important, right? We talked about that in terms of the Tisha B'Av, right? And how both temples were destroyed on the same day, like on the Jewish calendar. And it so happens that it mirrors 9/11 with the destruction of the two towers and the Solomon building. It's so, but it's Herod. Herod's is the second temple. And Herod was presiding at that, the time that Jesus was born.
Right.
Okay. As for these things which ye behold, the days will come in the which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. We talked about this, I think, during that lesson, and I'm glad you've got the article up there. Like, what's going on with the Wailing Wall? Like, the Wailing Wall is not completely destroyed. It's not. So the question, if we're just to interpret Jesus literally, or not, if we interpret Jesus literally, he's not quite right, because the wall is still standing. There's still stones on top of one another. So people go, oh, well, it's close enough. It's pretty destroyed, figured it was destroyed by the Romans in Titus's siege or whatever in 70 AD. So it's close enough. So Jesus is speaking figuratively. Well, I found that there is a minority group who have serious concerns about whether or not the Wailing Wall is actually part of Herod's temple.
Yeah.
And this is just an example. This is an article called Antonia, The Fortress Jerusalem Forgot by Marilyn Sams. And this is published on December 17th, 2015 in Popular Archaeology. I was able to listen to this, and I highly recommend everybody go check this out. Apparently, this idea has been around for quite some time. There's, it's not like everything was figured out when people started going back to Palestine and trying to figure out where the biblical events happened, and then the essablishment of the nation of Israel. It was a fluid process, and there's always been like people who were like, no, it's not that, it's this. But we kind of think, okay, that argument has been settled, but it's still a lively one. But what I found is if you question whether or not the Wailing Wall is the Wailing Wall, if you say, no, it might be somewhere else in Israel or in Palestine or whatever, you are actually, like, us just talking about it, we're actually engaging in a conspiracy theory called temple denialism.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know that. So I guess we should just
do that.
So we should stop.
Can't ask questions.
So, okay. So
no more videos.
No more videos. I'm done. So yeah.
Denialism.
Yeah. Temple denialism. But this is an interesting article, but you should not read it.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have anything else to say before I go on here?
It's just really interesting how much I get why it would ruffle people's feathers. There's a lot geopolitically and even just from a tourism perspective that yeah.
Yep.
But it's not super unique that anthropology and archaeology are hot button topics.
Yep. Yeah. As we've seen with the Fraser study that we've been doing.
Yes.
Okay. By the way, if anyone's interested, I made an audiobook on my channel called Jacob and the Mandrakes, which is part of Fraser's larger text called Folklore in the Old Testament. It's about the Mandrake story in Genesis and how it's associated with fertility and magical rites in general. He talks about it in the Golden Bough, but also in this text. So if you're interested in the Bible study, you're interested in the Fraser stuff that I've been doing, this is kind of at the intersection. Okay. And I'll be talking about that more extensively in the next installment of the Golden Bough. Okay. So, and they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? So, up until Luke 21:36, we are going to be talking about 4 different movements in regards to these signs. They're asking for signs, like, how do we know about the second coming? How do we know about the end of days stuff? So I'm getting this from the Pulpit commentary, which was very helpful, from Bible Hub. And it divvies it up. The apparent signs of the great catastrophe, which must not be mistaken for true signs. So we've got apparent signs, and those happen from verse 8 to verse 19. Then we have the true sign, which is going to be the destruction of Jerusalem, which will immediately follow it with the time of the Gentiles, which will be connected with it. Then we have the coming of the Lord, which will bring the period to an end. And I should say the true sign happens from verses 20 to 24, and the coming of the Lord happens from 25 to 27. And then there's a practical application from 28 to 36. All right, so here are the apparent signs. So we're going to start with verse 8, okay? And he said, Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. Go ye not, therefore, after them. So there's going to be all these people, right, that show up in between the death and resurrection of Christ and the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, one of these, if we scroll up here or scroll down, One of these is the most fascinating character. There were a lot of different false Christs that showed up, but in the book of Acts, one in particular fascinating character is named Simon Magus. Now, Simon Magus, I'm focusing in on him because I've been talking about Aleister Crowley in the Golden Bough stuff. And Crowley, I think at some point, identified himself as like a reincarnation of Simon Magus. And Simon was a magician, but it was weird. Like Simon like got baptized a Christian and was hanging out, and then like he wanted to do the wonder working that the other apostles were doing, and he was like he tried to buy the Holy Spirit. He even got baptized. He tried to buy the Holy Spirit from Peter, and they were like, what is going on? You think you can buy the Holy Spirit? It doesn't work that way at all. And because of this, there's all this apocryphal tradition that Simon Magus like was one of the founders of a certain type of Gnosticism, and that he would go on and appoint himself God, because apparently he was a very powerful sorcerer. And there are other texts that talk about this great battle between Peter and Simon Magus, where they like get into like this like like a wizard duel kind of. Although I'm not saying that Peter is a wizard, but it's kind of like that. I think ultimately Simon Magus ends up like levitating into the sky and like falls to his death, but he's like using demons to accomplish what he's doing.
I see.
So highly I think that's I've got the whole story here from, I actually went to the Lima page, but I think that'll serve our purposes. I think if people want to go deeper into that. All right, so more apparent signs, verse 9. But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. I mean, you could say that these things are happening all the time throughout every age. I mean, you could say they're happening right now. And some people go, look, there's people grumbling about Rocket Man in North Korea and Ukraine and all this other stuff. Like, oh, it's totally the end of the world.
Yeah.
And Christ is saying, he's like, no, these are apparent signs. They will be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the true sign. It's not sufficient. Or I forget. I'm got to go back and view is it sufficient or necessary? I should know. I'll revisit that.
Okay.
Well, let me talk while I look.
Well, I'm just saying, like, just because you see the queer surface signs doesn't mean.
Right.
I don't know if
they're not necessary.
Yeah.
They are not. The apparent signs are not necessary
nor sufficient.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Sorry to throw that around.
No, sorry. I got a little confused there. Okay. Then said he unto them, nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We have that. Okay. And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. We have that.
No way.
Yeah, we have that. Just had a blood moon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, Elon's blowing things up in the sky. So yeah, we got all sorts of things. But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues. Okay, like that's important. And into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. That's important, because if it's talking about delivering people up to the synagogues, like, that's not real. That's not happening now. Like that would have happened back then, that some of the apostles would have been brought into those synagogues and interrogated, persecuted, jailed, etc. So I think that sort of makes the case that these things already happened.
Yeah.
Okay. But some people are thinking, oh no, it's going to happen in the future,
right,
with like Noahide laws or something. And it shall turn to you. Let me see if I wanted to say anything else. Okay. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Okay. I wanted to cite this because I thought this was super beautiful. This is from Matthew Poole's commentary. That is, your persecution shall turn to you for a testimony against your adversaries, so as they themselves shall be brought by your confession of me to own me as the true Messiah. And their cruelty, which they mask under the visor of religion, shall be openly detected. And it shall at last appear to all the world that the judgments of God are just for the cruelty they have exercised upon you, and to you it shall be for a testimony. You shall have a more ampler occasion of testifying, both before kings and great men, that I am the true Messiah. Your faith, patience, and constancy shall be made more manifest. You shall also testify that my kingdom is not of this world, and that my disciples care not to expect a terrene felicity. They shall also be a testimony to you that you expect not your portion and felicity in this, but in another life. So there's a lot going on there, but essentially, like, this is a great opportunity to preach the gospel and bring more people into the faith. So ultimately, they get into that new Jerusalem one day that is filled with redeemed people, and not into hell that is looking like, from a traditionalist perspective, to be an eternal place. Okay. Settle it therefore in your hearts, not to meditate before what ye shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. So this is fascinating. It's like, where do ideas come from?
Yeah.
It's like you're becoming like God's like ventriloquist dummy, you know, like you're, something is like coming into, I don't want to say it's like channeled or whatever, but like, you don't have to worry. Like, the words will be there. You'll get the download.
Right.
What do you think?
That's super relatable. Like, anytime I've tried to sort of micromanage or in my head play out scenarios ahead of time, much less effective than just praying and asking to be given the words.
That's right.
Yeah. I don't think it has to be exclusively applied in this extreme of a situation, I guess is.
What do you mean?
Like, the circumstances in this chapter are kind of big, but we can also apply this in every moment.
Yes, we can.
We can ask to be a vessel of Christ's love.
Yep.
We don't have to workshop what we're going to say and how we're going to say it.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so.
That's pretty cool. And you shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends, and some of you shall they cause to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But there shall not an hair of your head perish. So I thought that was intriguing, because it seemed to contradict what we just read in verse 16. But I think the idea is we need to have an expansive understanding of what perish means.
Yep.
So the body may die, but as we've seen through our study of the different dimensions, realms, or whatever that are making up Earth, right? Heaven, hell, Abraham's bosom, lake of fire, etc. Like, clearly, one's consciousness and one's soul is not perishing when the body dies. It's going somewhere. Okay. So I think that's what that means here. Like, the essential things are not going to perish, and there's going to be a resurrection at some point too.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I agree. I don't think it means there's no pain in the Earth game.
Oh, there certainly is. Right. I mean, he says here, some of you are going to be put to death.
Right.
And they do. Many of the apostles are killed. Okay. Verse 19. So this is the end of the apparent signs, and we're going to get into the true sign, which is the destruction of Jerusalem. In your patience possess ye your souls. 20. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter therein too. Okay? So because so many of the early Christians knew about these words, they were able to get out of Jerusalem when this destruction happened. Apparently they were able to make it to the hills.
Mm-hmm.
For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. That feels really important, because that seems to be, it's like, it doesn't say some, it doesn't say partially, it says all things which are written may be fulfilled. Now, what does this mean? Like all things, like the prophecies related to the Messiah? Are we talking about, because clearly there's stuff about the millennial reign and the New Jerusalem and all that still has to happen, unless somehow we're supposed to say that happened too. That's a whole other can of worms. But I think this does kind of point to that the apocalypse already happened. That I'm seek it out for yourself. I'm a person investigating this, and I've become a little bit more certain that that's the case. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Okay, so what does that mean? Like, Jerusalem's going to be trodden down. So this means that the Gentiles in some way are like an instrument of God for the judgment of Israel for rejecting Christ. Okay. And I guess they're going to be put in control of that area. I don't know. Like, that seems to be what it's saying. And that whatever blessings were on the Old Testament Jews, I guess they go forward to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles are supposed to preach there in Jerusalem this message. But we since know, since 1947, that the state of Israel has come back. So does that mean that the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled? Right? They do have their own state now. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but it seems like that the period of the Gentiles has come to an end. Is over.
Yeah.
Maybe this gets into a lot of stuff, you know, but it would potentially count that as a signal. Do I need to slow down or?
No, I think I'm following.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now in verse 25, we're going to get the beginning of the coming of the Lord passages.
Yeah.
And this goes to 27.
You can keep going. I'll fix this.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So, and there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Okay, so it doesn't really tell us what kind of celestial signs to anticipate. I think that would kind of require knowledge of all the other books of the Bible, specifically the book of Revelation, which we haven't done yet. I mean, perhaps this is pointing to the darkening of the sun, the darkening of the moon. I don't know yet. We don't have enough here to say that for certain. But I think that's kind of what it's pointing to. Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. I don't know what that means. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Some people think that this means that the sky is going to fall or roll up like a scroll.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know yet. I don't know. Maybe it did happen. I don't know. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. I think the idea here is it'll be unmistakable. Everyone will see it. It won't be like this special revelation in the desert, which is what Paul saw. Right. And that's a whole can of worms. Like
we've opened it a little bit prior.
Yeah. You know, Jesus has said, like, if you see me in the desert, or someone says they had this personal audience or whatever, don't believe them.
Trust them.
Like, if I come back, everyone will see me. It's like, okay, well, what happened with Paul in Damascus? Like, what happened there?
Yeah.
I mean, Paul writes some cool things, but like, clearly something's not adding up here. Okay. And we have the cloud. Jesus is coming in a cloud. And we've had this idea of the cloud this as a religious symbol throughout the Bible. Like when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, they followed a cloud. We have this, I think going on the Mount of Transfiguration, the voice of God boomed out of a cloud. This idea of surfing the heavens on a cloud is pretty intense. Okay. And now we get into the practical application till verse 36. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And he spake to them a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. I think there is some consensus that fig tree is a symbol for the nation of Israel. Okay. But let's just, without reading in between the lines, just go with it here. When they now shoot forth, ye see and know of your own selves that summer is now nigh at hand. Right? So you know what signs to look for. Just as you know when trees bloom.
Mm-hmm.
So likewise ye, when ye see these things come to pass, know ye that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. That seems to point to that the second coming has already happened, right? It's in this generation, unless we want to expand what generation means. And the destruction of Jerusalem happened by Titus in 70 AD. Okay. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. I thought this was pretty metal, because you think on the meaning, like words are actually going to endure more than the present state of the creation. They are somehow prior and will transcend all the transformations that heaven and earth will go through.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. Like when we start talking about like Akashic records or like code of the simulation or whatever, In the
beginning, there was
the word.
Yeah. Words being a method or medium of creation.
That is, I'm open to that idea. I'd have to, this gets into, if Jesus was the word, this gets into like Trinitarian talk. Is like Jesus the one that created reality?
Well, I mean, you could also have creation occurring within the creation.
I think so. You want to expand upon that?
Just in a literal sense. Like you can create, even though you did not create, like you created these notes, these words, we're creating this video. We're within the created realm.
That's fine. I'll go with that. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm not trying to be like super out there.
No, yeah. I was trying to be super out there.
Yeah. Well,
I was reading more into what you were saying.
Word magic, words, spelling, etc. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, there's. So we've talked about this a little bit before, and we learned this term for if we're like, oh, okay, like the events, like the events of prophecy happened more or less back then, were called preterism. Okay. But there's actually, and I think I even mentioned that like I was like contemplating partial preterism.
Yeah.
And I found that there's another camp called hyperpreterism. Okay. Hyperpreterism, I got this from Grok. Or it's also called full preterism or consistent preterism, takes preterism to its extreme, asserting that all biblical prophecy, including the second coming, the resurrection, and the final judgment, has already been fulfilled, mostly by AD 70. It denies any future eschatological events. I don't know if I subscribe to this view because I had Grok like compare and contrast them all. Like if you go down here, fulfillment of prophecy. Preterism is like all fulfilled by AD 70, partial, most fulfilled by AD 70, some future, all fulfillment by AD 70. But like the second coming, preterism says it's spiritual and it happened in the past. partial says it was literal and happens in the future. And hyper says it's spiritual and past. What does it even mean to have a spiritual second coming? Like, I don't get that. Like,
my take on it was a non-physical.
Well, it sounded pretty physical. He destroyed the temple.
Yeah.
So that sounds pretty physical to me. So I don't know. I don't
really sure what to do with this.
I'm not sure. Like, I did not have time to go and research all these different views to know if Grok is accurately represented them all. But even if it does, I still don't see myself here. Yeah. I still don't, in all these, and you can look at the screen and you can see, do you see yourself here? Like the new heaven and earth on the preterist view, it's a present spiritual reality. I don't believe that. Like this new heaven and earth is filled with effing minions. Mm-hmm. No way. Okay. Partial preterism, future physical reality. This thing needs to be cleansed. Hyper, it's a present spiritual reality. Unless like I'm supposed to be so blissed out and it's happening in my mind.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's not what I hear. I hear the new heaven and earth is going to be this new Jerusalem that descends and we're all going to go live there. It's not going to be like this blissed out home thing. Yeah.
It's not like an astral experience.
No.
It's a physical experience.
It's here. It's physically here on the earth. So I don't know where I sit with any of this stuff.
Yeah.
But all right. Verse 34. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch ye therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. Although this is interesting, this is a little something I picked up watching some videos, doing some research here. There was in the 70s and 80s, David Wilkerson, who is a pretty famous pastor, and I guess he came up with a film called The Rapture, The Return of Christ. He actually started to shift the evangelical conversation about who the Antichrist was or who the beast was or whatever to this like supercomputer in Brussels that was going to have like everybody with like barcodes.
Yeah.
And like people like, I don't know. It's just, I thought that was interesting that's where that came from. But we have a few more passages here. And in the daytime, he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to him in the temple to hear him. All right. I got no notes beyond that, but
yeah.
Wow. That was actually a pretty lengthy study. 42 minutes.
Yeah. 42.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to say in closing?
No, this is super interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot to chew on. I think a lot of rabbit holes of inquiry people can go on based on whatever they're interested in.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everyone else.
Thanks, Luke.